Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this rather short video, I'm going to be looking at the week starting on Monday, November the 25th, 2024. I'll start the video by looking at what the main astrological events are this week, and then I will consider a couple of Donald Trump's cabinet picks, in particular his pick for Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and his pick for Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. I haven't looked at either people's charts before, and also I'm going to have a quick look at the chart of Matt Gaetz. So Matt Gaetz was his original pick to be Attorney General, but that didn't work out because of all these stories about Matt Gaetz's various exploits, his sort of connection, I suppose, with sex trafficking. I don't quite know what the details are about that, but anyway, Matt Gaetz didn't work out, so I will be looking at his chart. And I'll finish this video by looking at the I Ching for this week. So I'm going to cast up an I Ching to see what this week is going to be like, and this I Ching entirely voluntary. If you don't want your I Ching read, then just don't watch the end of a video where I go through the week from a perspective of, I have 4 sections: general, money, career and business, and then relationships. So anyway, let's look at what's happening this week. Usual reminder, if you enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. And if you're not subscribed, I would be really, really grateful if you were to subscribe. I've now hit 8,000 subscribers. I'm not quite sure if that is a milestone. Sort of 8,000 isn't a super decisive number. I suppose the real milestone I'm now aiming for is 10,000. Will I get there by Christmas? I think that is pretty unlikely, but still, it's a nice target to get to 10,000 by Christmas. I think I would be very lucky to get to 9,000 by Christmas. Anyway, let's look at what's going on. So there is, you can see pictures as Marco Rubio on the right, and then we've got Pam Bondi on the left. So this chart represents the positions of the planets at the beginning of the week. So at midnight, November the 25th, New York time. So the first thing that happens this week is really on Tuesday. It's when we've got Mercury going stationary retrograde. So, there it is at around sort of 22, 23 Sagittarius. So by Monday, Mercury is slowing down in a big way. I mean, it's hardly moving at all, and then it goes retrograde, and it will stay retrograde for 3 weeks. So it might be a time when we should be reconsidering things next 3 weeks. So if you've got plans, maybe you should perhaps put them on hold, or rather you should expect that things might not work out as expected. But of course, as Mercury retrograde is a big event, I will be doing a separate video on it very soon. Probably my video for Tuesday will talk about Mercury going stationary retrograde. Then on Wednesday, we have got the Sun making a trine to Mars. In fact, we've got sort of this grand trine in fire forming, if you count the North Node as a planet. So Sun trine Mars is very energetic. Things move with Sun trine Mars, even though Mercury is retrograde. So we want action, and there'll be a certain fire in the air with Sun trine Mars. Now, Sun trine Mars sounds good, it sounds fun, sounds exciting, but we should not forget that the Sun and Mars are sort of masculine, positive planets. They can be quite aggressive. And so Sun trine Mars, people might overreact. And when you've got a trine, things can happen rather too easily. So I don't know if you're playing with fire or electricity or explosives or something like that, Sun trine Mars. It's just very easy for things to go bang. So while I think for most of us Sun trine Mars could be a very energizing influence, I think for some of us it might be somewhat problematic. So we need to be a little bit careful with Sun trine Mars. Then on Wednesday also we have Saturn quintile Uranus. So we can see this here, that Saturn is at 1246 Pisces, Uranus is at 2454 Taurus. So that means that Saturn and Uranus are 72 degrees apart, and 72 degrees is of course 1/5 of the circle. So I do think that this is important, or even if it's a little bit subtle. So, Saturn Uranus as a pairing is about tension. I mean, Saturn wants to hold things together, wants to restrict, and Uranus is looking to explode. It's looking to create changes. And so Saturn is trying to prevent Uranus from getting out of control. Uranus is trying to overthrow Saturn, so they're somewhat at odds with each other. But quintile is an aspect that it's a very human aspect. It's about trying to create things. We start by creating things in our mind, and then perhaps we try to make them happen in the real world. And so it may be that some of us are actually trying to use the tension of Saturn quintile Uranus, perhaps trying to create tension. May not be us. It may be countries, states, trying to create a tense environment, perhaps, for their own purposes. So we might see this on the sort of on the international scene. I suppose it could be about deliberate destabilization, or saying things, announcing things to just make things more difficult than they already are. So I suppose we have to think particularly of Ukraine. That's, I suppose, the world's #1 trouble spot, where Russia has just fired an intercontinental ballistic missile. Of course, it wasn't armed with nuclear weapons, but that adds to the tension. And that Saturn quintile Uranus is going to be really picking up on it, sort of in terms of propaganda, for example. I suppose propaganda both from Russia, both from the West, from NATO, what people are doing, trying to create tension, trying to take things to the line. That could be how Saturn quintile Uranus works. Then, right at the end of the week, on December the 1st, we have got a new moon, and that new moon is around I think it's 9-10 Sagittarius, and that's probably the most important event of the week, and I will be doing a separate video on that. And I suppose the thing about the new moon is that it represents the beginning of a new lunar cycle. So that means that this week is the end of a lunar cycle. We've had the full moon, we've just had the last quarter moon, and so it's over. Something is over. Whatever that cycle was, it started on the beginning of November, just before the presidential election. It's now coming to an end. God, this November, in some ways it seems to have been a long month, November. I mean, a lot has happened, certainly in terms of the election. Things have completely changed this month, haven't they? It's really been quite dramatic. But the new moon, I suppose, things will perhaps will get a new perspective, because it will be a new cycle, and I suppose in some respects, somehow things will have to return to normal. I mean, things will never be normal again. Well, that's always the case, isn't it? But perhaps that is, I suppose, there's going to be sort of new challenges with the new moon, and but I think things will start afresh, and so perhaps that's something to look forward to. But I will be covering the new moon on December the 1st in detail, I don't know, I suppose in just under a week's time. So I want to now consider some of Donald Trump's picks. I mean, he's been making all sorts of picks in terms of the cabinet, and he did try to pick this Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz to there's Matt Gaetz's horoscope to be Attorney General. I don't want to sort of go into details about what he's accused of doing or what it is suggested he's doing, but there seems to have been sort of allegations that he was involved in sex trafficking. I don't know. I mean, I haven't gone into great detail about it, but Gaetz is, he's a Trump loyalist, and so perhaps he was a natural pick because he was a loyalist to be Attorney General. But anyway, Matt Gaetz has withdrawn. So here is Matt Gaetz's chart, and Matt Gaetz is a Taurus. Again, don't have a time of birth for him. Taurus with the moon in Scorpio. I mean, Matt Gaetz's moon in Scorpio is perhaps a little bit dangerous. I mean, we don't know, of course, exactly where his moon is. I mean, because this is just a noon chart, so his moon could, I suppose, be anywhere between 6 Scorpio and 18 Scorpio, approximately. But still, he was born around the time of a full moon, and so that Scorpio, especially if it was a Nevere combustor, this just may be someone who just attracts things, and perhaps he lives a little bit dangerously, and so maybe that would have been an unwise pick. And another issue maybe with Matt Gaetz is his Mars. So his Mars is his Mars is in the first degree of Libra. So Mars, if you've got Mars at the first degree of Libra, in other words, it's opposition the Aries point, there may be a sense in which you are perhaps attracting trouble. I mean, that's not always the case with Mars on the Aries point, but it is quite a prominent Mars because it's close to the Aries point, and the Aries point represents the world at large. So if you're an Attorney General with Mars in the first degree of Libra, you are attracting quite a lot of things, and that Mars is is opposition to Venus, and it is in mutual reception to Venus. So I suppose you could say Mars opposition Venus may well say something about sexuality and his sexual reputation, at least, in terms of this suggestion that he's sort of had involvement in sex trafficking. I said I have absolutely no idea whether that's true or not. I don't know. I'm just looking at sort of what I sort of read on the internet. It's just impossible to know what's true, isn't it? But Venus opposition Mars, it does suggest someone who might in some ways live dangerously, and that Mars is square Neptune. I mean, not exactly square Neptune, but it's, I suppose it's about a 5-degree orb from the square to Neptune, and so you could say with Mars square Neptune that it can be an attraction to things that that are somewhat shady. That's certainly possible. It sort of attracts him. Even if he knows it's dangerous, he just kind of wants to get involved. That's how Mars square Neptune can work. Of course, it's not just the accusations about sex trafficking. He's very interested in marijuana. I mean, I think that he has associates with associations, I believe, with people involved in the marijuana industry, and I believe he's a sort of an advocate for liberalization of marijuana, and federal government not interfering with what state governments want to do in terms of marijuana. And of course, he is a libertarian. I think that he's sort of a libertarian wing of the the Republican Party. So, that's his chart. Oh, Mercury opposition Uranus. I mean, if you've got Mercury opposition Uranus, then that indicates you have a sense of excitement. It's quite a nice Mercury in some respects. His Mercury is in a separate sign from the Sun, so it's always good to have your Mercury in a different sign to the Sun because it gives a certain amount of objectivity. But Mercury opposition Uranus, there is a sense in which he's looking for excitement and can communicate in a way that may at times be a little bit outrageous, but he might have been just too difficult to handle aside from his reputation, and I think the chances of him getting through getting accepted by the Senate, I think that's how it works. They have to go through some committee in order to get to the cabinet, but the chances of him getting through seem to be a little bit slim anyway. So Trump went for someone else to be Attorney General, and he went for a woman called Pam Bondi. So Pam Bondi was born on November the 17th, 1965, I believe in Tampa, Florida. And so I don't know, again, I don't have a time of birth for her. And I suppose a rather different person, though she does have a Venus-Mars contact. I suppose she has Venus-Mars conjunction in Capricorn. I mean, it's not a particularly close conjunction between Venus-Mars, but I suppose that might give her a certain sense of charisma. But it's in Capricorn. I mean, that is relatively sensible, comparatively speaking. Of course, she is a long-term supporter of Trump. I mean, some would say that she's not sensible because she's been involved with all sorts of controversies in terms of I suppose there's sort of donations for PACs, and there was some story about how she had some event and she didn't want the event to clash with an execution, so she persuaded the governor of Florida to postpone an execution, so because she didn't want the execution to sort of mess up with an important social engagement. So I don't think, in spite of having Venus-Mars conjunction in Capricorn, she's an entirely sensible and uncontroversial pick, but it's a Trump pick. So again, I don't have a time of birth for her, which is annoying. And she's very earthy. She's got Moon in Virgo for sure, and she has got Venus-Mars conjunction in Capricorn, and that Sun in Scorpio. You could say that Sun is kind of opposition Algol. I don't know whether you should use oppositions with fixed stars. I'm never quite sure on that, but her Sun is going to be hit by Uranus, and you can see if you look at if you compare her chart with the inauguration, with Trump's inauguration. I mean, I don't know when she officially becomes Attorney General. I suppose she'll get through the Senate. I don't think she's controversial enough. And so Uranus is at 2318 Taurus. So Uranus has been making an opposition to her Sun. And so you could say that Uranus opposition her Sun right now, because it's pretty close to the opposition of her Sun, maybe about her being propelled into the public eye even more than she was already. I mean, she's a well-known figure in Florida politics, but now she's becoming a national figure. And so Uranus has been opposition her Sun. Uranus will go stationary direct, and it will opposition her Sun again. So as she becomes Attorney General, there may be things she has to deal with, and there may be perhaps things about her past. I mean, of course, with Trump and his picks, it seems that the media is sort of desperate to find out as much as they can about the people he's picking and to find out what they've done in the past. I suppose that's what the media does. And of course, Trump, I think with Trump, his first priority when he makes his pick, I think, is loyalty. I mean, I think in his 2017 to 2020 presidency, I think that he felt that he was let down, and loyalty is something that Trump puts a very high premium on. And I suppose looking at Trump's chart, that's not surprising. Here is someone with Leo rising and Mars in Leo rising. Yeah, loyalty matters to Trump, and it's perhaps, in terms of his cabinet picks, loyalty is more important than perhaps reputation. Finally, there is Marco Rubio. Again, I don't have a time of birth for Marco Rubio. I get the impression that Marco Rubio is a fairly straightforward, conventional person. I don't think you're going to find too many skeletons in his closet. At least that's my impression of Marco Rubio. So he's going to be the Secretary of State, and a lot of people are concerned about it. They're saying, "Oh, well, he's just another neoconservative," and he's quite hardline on Cuba, and he is a friend of Israel, so he's supportive of Israel, supportive of Cuba. As far as Ukraine is concerned, yeah, he's supportive of Ukraine, but I think he recognizes that Ukraine, it's not going to happen. So I think there's perhaps a realism with Marco Rubio and Ukraine, and perhaps this is not his priority. I mean, his origins. I mean, his family come from Cuba. I mean, it's not like with Antony Blinken, where his family come from Central Europe. And I think there is perhaps an issue here when you've got people in the State Department who have family ties to Eastern Europe. Perhaps their descendants have come from Eastern Europe, so you brought these ancestral resentments with them, and they sort of come into the State Department, and they kind of want to turn the past into the future. That is a bit of a possibility. That has been a possibility. Of course, with Marco Rubio, all his resentments, his family resentments, relate to Cuba. So that might have an impact on him. So it's perhaps not very good for U.S.-Cuban relations. Although I suppose, as is the case with Cuba, the more Cuba gets sanctioned, the longer the regime stays apart. I think if Cuba had never been sanctioned, it wouldn't be communist anymore. Communism would have probably fallen in the 1960s. Anyway, this is Marco Rubio's horoscope. I suppose he's a Gemini. Henry Kissinger was a Gemini too, wasn't he? So I don't know. I suppose if you're Secretary of State, it does help to be a Gemini. I mean, to an extent. I mean, you need to be flexible, don't you? You have to be flexible in terms of dealing with shifting alliances, and you can't just be stuck on one thing. Like sort of Antony Blinken is totally focused on I suppose his animosities and really upsetting everyone, upsetting the Chinese, obviously upsetting the Russians. Maybe Rubio has greater flexibility, and his sun is in Gemini. It's trine Uranus, and I suppose his sun is opposition Jupiter. But I don't really see that excessiveness there, Sun opposition Jupiter with Rubio. I mean, Jupiter Neptune in Sagittarius, you could say that there are high hopes with Jupiter Neptune in Sagittarius. And so high hopes that might be idealistic in terms of what can be done, and where his focus is going to be. There is a view that his focus might actually be on South America and restoring America's presence and reputation in the region. I mean, I think I've heard it said that he might have good relationships with Javier Milei. So Javier Milei in Argentina is, I need to look at his chart again. I mean, probably Javier Milei is a sort of, I suppose he's a sort of radical libertarian. He wants to destroy government, and so in a way, Javier Milei must have been a big relief for Javier Milei that Trump got elected, and so Javier Milei is someone who is obviously not a communist, not allied to Russia, who is a libertarian. That might be the kind of model that the Trump government is thinking in terms of spreading American influence in South America. But with Rubio's chart, we don't even know what sign his moon's in. I mean, his moon is in, at noon is late 2848 Cancer, noon in Miami. I think he was born in Miami. So could be in Cancer, could be in Leo. We just don't know, and so that kind of limits, what we have to say. I mean, he does have Mercury Venus in Taurus. I think that Mercury Venus in Taurus is pretty useful. I mean, Mercury Venus is communicates well and is able to sort of be fairly grounded in terms of what he says. I mean, by the way, another thing about Rubio compared to what I think will be his predecessor, Antony Blinken. Antony Blinken had a Sun-Mercury conjunction in Aries. And so Antony Blinken didn't really have much objectivity. And I think we really saw that in terms of him dealing with Russia and Ukraine. He was so focused on himself and his view of the world, he just couldn't see it. He couldn't step outside his biases. But I suppose with Marco Rubio, having Mercury and the Sun in different signs, I think is more helpful. I think you do need a certain amount of objectivity if you're Secretary of State. And really, that's all I'm going to say about Marco Rubio. Again, I don't have a time of birth. It does limit what I can observe. Maybe you observe something. I mean, I think there are things to see. I mean, you could say he's got, he has got a grand trine in air, kind of, because he's got Mars in Aquarius, Uranus in Libra, Sun in Gemini. You might say that he's got Uranus on the Sun-Mars midpoint. Now, that grand trine in air, in one sense, is useful. I mean, I suppose he has a certain amount of flexibility there. Certainly, again, a lot more flexibility from his predecessor in terms of dealing with different people. But Uranus on the Sun-Mars midpoint, particularly with that grand trine on Earth, it may be that as Secretary of State, he has to deal with stuff which may be not entirely to his liking. And I think, okay, here's what I see. Okay, here's the problem. I've just noticed it. So his Uranus is at 936 Leo. So let me just compare Marco Rubio's chart with the 2025 inauguration chart to show you what I'm looking at. So you can see that Uranus is at 2318 at Trump's inauguration on January the 20th, 2025. So that means that Uranus is making a sesquiquadrate to Rubio's Uranus. So there's Uranus sesquiquadrate. So that means that Uranus will kind of be on the Sun-Mars midpoint soon after his inauguration. So if you look at Rubio's chart and his actual precise Sun-Mars midpoint would be, we don't know for sure where his Sun-Mars midpoint actually is because we don't have a time of birth, but his Sun-Mars midpoint is sort of 9 I make it sort of 9 degrees 12 minutes. So 9 degrees 12 minutes Libra. So that's perhaps a degree to look for. So Uranus makes the sesquiquadrate at 2412 Taurus. So 2412. Well, 2412 would be. Well, that means it will happen later in the year. So that will sort of by March. Uranus, there will be Uranus sesquiquadrate Uranus, and so Uranus will be on his Sun-Mars midpoint, and so this might be a time where he has to really start to deal with things. I don't know whether it's Ukraine, it could be Gaza. I need to look at this in more detail, but I think perhaps there's a challenge coming up for Marco Rubio pretty soon after he takes office. But I suppose that's obvious, isn't it? I mean, Biden is, certainly regarding Ukraine, Biden is creating such a mess for the incoming Trump regime. It's almost as if he's doing it deliberately. Is this a Biden thing? I mean, he created a mess for his own party by endorsing Kamala Harris straight away, when Kamala Harris was a completely inappropriate candidate to be president. By endorsing it, it prevented an open primary. And now he's creating a mess for Trump by authorizing these missiles, these long-range missiles into beyond the sort of 1991 Russian borders. So maybe that's something he's doing. He wants to make a mess for people, and that's what Biden is doing. And so Rubio, probably at a fairly early stage, is going to actually have to deal with that mess. But anyway, I suppose you could say that I'm just stating the obvious there. So let's now turn to the I Ching. So just a reminder, you don't have to be part of this I Ching. If you don't want I Ching done, then you can stop watching the video. This I Ching only applies to people watching the I Ching section of this video. And this I Ching reading will be divided into 4 sections. A general section, then I'm going to look at money, then career and business, and then relationships. So I asked the question, what is the week starting on Monday, November the 25th, going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was the joyous. So again, this is this section. I'll be looking at generally what this hexagram means and where it goes to. So the joyous, we've had this quite recently, and it looks like a nice hexagram because, well, for a start, it's called the joyous, and we have got a lake on a lake, which is, this is sort of a symbol for a lake, but this trigram represents a lake, and so you've got a lake on a lake, so it's very watery, and it seems to be about being able to enjoy oneself, although there is an alternative interpretation of the joyous that Greg Winkup uses, which is not the joyous, but standing up straight. And perhaps because we have to make sure that we're not overwhelmed by the tide of events, we have to do our duty and do what we're obliged to do. But the Greg Winkup interpretation of that's, I don't know, it's not really supported as far as I can see by the 2 other versions I look at a lot, by the Legge version or by the Wilhelm version. But it is something that perhaps we do need to consider. So we perhaps start the week feeling quite good, that things are happening, things are flowing, that finally things are moving, and that things are self-supporting. But the problem is that we've got 2 moving lines, and the 2 moving lines are the 3rd line and the 6th line. And so the 3rd and the 6th lines tend not to be fortunate. And one way of looking at it is to say that there's just too much complacency here. Too much pleasure. We're enjoying ourselves, but everything seems fine, but there's no substance to it. And we may get caught up with what other people are doing. Certainly, if you're relaxing, if you're with friends, and you're just picking up on a certain contentedness of the situation, then something might be brewing that you're not actually looking at. And so, you might think everything is fine, but all the while there's a conflict that is brewing. And perhaps, in terms of enjoyment, ask yourself, what is the basic nature of your enjoyment? And the nature of that enjoyment, it may not be anything to do with you. You're perhaps enjoying what other people are enjoying. And at the same time, with the joyous, it's not necessarily about you. It may be what you observe. It may be that you observe other people just not being very serious. They're having fun. They're not really thinking about tomorrow. They're just getting carried away with it all. And there seems to be something incredibly superficial about it. I mean, it may be like, I suppose in an extreme case, it sort of could be like, enjoying yourself on the Titanic, but something is about to collapse. And there's something completely oblivious about it. And so I think maybe the advice here is to be detached, and perhaps remember to look at sort of what Greg Winkup said about this hexagram. He calls it sort of standing straight. So that means not being overly influenced by what is happening around you. Sticking to what you know is important. That does matter. And not being carried away. Understanding that you have got things that you need to do, and it can't be a situation where you just lose control. Now, we've got two moving lines. So because these two, third and the sixth line moves, we get actually quite a dramatic transformation. And the joyous moves to hexagram 1, which is the creative. And this, I think, gives us a very different picture. The creative is a very primal, yet quite serious hexagram. There is, in the end, something that has to be done, something that we have to initiate. And we don't even know what we have to initiate. The creative is like pure energy. And so because it's pure energy, I can't say it is like this or it's like that. Pure energy cannot be defined. And it may be about a start, a new beginning. And I think if we look at what's happening astrologically, the creative may in a way be talking about the new moon. Because we've got a new moon right at the end of the week. And, in a way, the new moon is about the creative. I mean, I know that the new moon, you could say, is quite a silent thing. It happens in the darkness because you can't see the moon at the time of the new moon, obviously. But it is the beginning. And I suppose with the creative, we have this, it's that first spark. And that first spark leads all over the place. But perhaps that first spark, the very beginning of something, is completely silent, is still. And so the new moon is, I would perhaps link that with the creative. And so in terms of putting this whole thing together, it is the end of the lunar cycle. And as the lunar cycle comes to an end, with 58, the joyous, things are disintegrating. The lunar cycle is ending in a rather chaotic way, and people aren't serious. People are just people want to enjoy themselves. They don't know why they want to enjoy themselves. It's not fundamental to them, and so it's not satisfactory. And all we can do is not get caught up in it. And then, end of the week, new moon. That's the time to be creative, to start something afresh and to really initiate something. And I'm not going to tell you what to initiate because the creative is beyond definition. And so now I'm going to look at things from the perspective of money. So with 58, the joyous, I mean, it's pretty obvious what I have to say. I mean, I'm saying that it's a time when there's plenty of opportunity for wasting money, for spending money that maybe you can't afford. There are lots of things to spend money on, and lots of temptations to spend money. And, maybe you want to spend money on pleasure, or maybe someone else wants to spend money on pleasure. But there is, I think, a general sense of irresponsibility here. And perhaps for some people, pleasure seems to be an end in itself. And it's so easy to get caught up in it all, isn't it? So I think in the first instance, it's very important not to get too caught up in other people's activities, because it could be expensive. Or at the very least, you could watch other people spending money they can't necessarily afford. And so you could say that money spent on pleasure is money that is wasted. I think we can certainly say that. And I know that money can be spent on pleasure and it may not be wasted, but it's not integral to us. It's spending money on things that are just trivial, that just are not going to last. And just be aware of how other people can waste money, and also be aware of how people can influence you, and you could end up spending money that is just you don't want to spend. So I would have said be really cautious in a financial sense. And then this hexagram moves to the creative, and I think that does create a different picture. So because we've got two moving lines, this moves to the creative. I just really feel that this relates to the end of a week. As the new moon starts to form over the weekend, sort of next weekend, of course, not the weekend I'm recording this on. So that would be, what's that? The weekend of, God, when is it? That would be the weekend of the 30th, Saturday the 30th, and December the 1st, that kind of time. So as the new moon forms, so over the weekend, you might start to have insights about money, being able to look at money in a completely different way. And you can see what can be done with money, perhaps how you've made mistakes in the past, and you can be very creative with money. But so a new idea comes into being. Doesn't mean you have to act on it straight away, but you know that it's a new start. And okay, it can be a dangerous time because it is a creative, it's quite raw, it's quite primal, but doesn't mean you don't have to act straight away. You just have to think about what this new beginning is all about. So just try to see this lunar cycle through. Last week of the lunar cycle, I think for many of us, the last week of this lunar cycle is going to be financially dangerous. But with the new moon, which I think I would tie with the creative, perhaps that's the new beginning. And it may not be about the new moon, it just might be in general at the end of a week that we start to get a picture of what needs to be done. But it seems to be that some kind of action is required financially. That doesn't mean action as in terms of spending money, but more clear, definite action, perhaps in terms of organizing money, or perhaps starting some new project which you might think has some sort of, could have a financial benefit in the end. But you just have to be a little bit careful because it is such a primal force. You don't want to sort of immediately respond by spending a lot of money on it or anything like that. I think you have to really sort of work out where it's taking you. Then there is career and business, your working life. Of course, that may not be appropriate to you. It does depend on your situation. And I would have said that this week you start off kind of feeling quite optimistic. Things may feel as if they should be going your way, and there might be a general sense of happiness, and perhaps at work you may feel that things are moving, or if you're looking for a new job, you might think that there are opportunities here. But I think things are going to dissipate quite quickly. I don't think there's going to be much seriousness. I mean, there's going to be perhaps an inappropriate amount of levity, perhaps in the workplace, and so people may not be, the people around you may not be taking things too seriously. They may be putting the emphasis on pleasure. And I suppose in an American context, that may make sense because Thursday is Thanksgiving, I believe. I'm still not used to American holidays. But with Thursday being Thanksgiving, perhaps in the run-up to Thanksgiving, in terms of what's happening, in terms of how people are trying to organise themselves, things may be sort of perhaps more chaotic than usual. People may be lazy, perhaps. They're perhaps focusing on other things. I mean, I know this does presumably happen every year, but it may be more intense than usual, at least in terms of your perceptions. People not taking things seriously, just focusing on the short term, and you kind of know that is inappropriate. And I suppose what you need to do is you need to separate yourself from all of that. And just because everyone is moving in one direction, it doesn't mean you have to also move in that direction. You can hold firm. You can resist temptation, resist pressure. You need to do things your way at work. And even if that means taking on extra work, if that means doing things that other people should be doing themselves, but that's just something that you need to do. And of course, if you run your own business, even more so. I think that if you're running your own business, you're not going to perhaps get much support from other people, the people who you're hiring or working with, or people you're relying on. And I think that you have to be different. You have to show that you're not going to get caught up in the festivities, if you're in the Americas. Even if you're not in the Americas, I think there may just be a sense in which people want to just let go and relax. But not you. It should be you. When I say should, there's strong temptations for you to just join the crowd. But I would just recommend that you don't join the crowd, that you try to sort of stand up against it all. And we've got these two moving lines. The two moving lines are not particularly fortunate. They are, as I've just been saying, they are about getting too caught up in the surrounding pleasure and not really thinking about the future, but enjoying yourself in a way that doesn't feel good. It just feels empty, and you're supposed to enjoy yourself, so you enjoy yourself. So there's no point in enjoying yourself, really, because it's going to be empty. It's someone else's idea of pleasure, and it's not your idea of pleasure. Anyway, so we have these two moving lines, and that does mean we move to a new hexagram. And this hexagram, I think, is much more fortunate. So it may well be, in terms of work and business, but it is a week of two halves. The week starts off, I would have said, in quite a dangerous way, when there's temptations left, right, and centre. The emphasis on relaxation and pleasure and enjoying oneself could be just overwhelming. And even if it's not about you, it's about other people, and it's just a problem. And then at the end of the week, as we move towards the new moon, you can turn over a new leaf. You can perhaps start afresh. And so if you, for example, if you have been planning on doing things in the sense of career and work, then this week don't start too early, because if you try to start too early, it may get nowhere. And of course, we've got matters are further confused by the fact that Mercury is going stationary direct on Tuesday, and that's going to make things a little more difficult. But I think that by the end of the week, even though Mercury is retrograde, I think you will be in a position to make a new start, and to bring something new into being, to make it into being, because it is the creative, it is that first spark, and I think you can actually create something at the end of the week, perhaps around the time of a new moon, and that should see you through into the following week. So, overall, in terms of your work, if you're working, if that's relevant to you, I think it's just important to be different, not follow the crowd, be prepared to do things your own way, and not necessarily to start new creative projects until the very end of the week. That is the time, and maybe you need to be thinking about the new moon on the 1st of December. I mean, that new moon, by the way, what time is that new moon? That new moon it's on 1st of December. It is, new moon is where's it gone? Yeah, it's 6:21 a.m. in London. So, in fact, if you're in California, the new moon will be on November 30th, on sort of right at the end of Saturday. So, whatever your time zone, there is a new moon on Sunday, or it could be very late on Saturday if you're in California, for example, or Hawaii or Alaska. So that's career and business. It's not a particularly easy situation, but I think if you get the timing right, and if you can resist temptation and you hold firm, then I think you should be okay. And finally, there is relationships. So in terms of other people, 58, the joyous. You could say that 58, the joyous, is the party hexagram. I mean, that is a way of looking at it. It sounds so good. It is the joyous, and you want to enjoy yourself with other people. And, when you're interacting with other people, it just feels that things seem to be moving. People are happy. People are sharing. And, you've got a lake above a lake. So the water is flowing, and it's not exhausting itself. And so, once a party starts, there's no ending to it. And I suppose, in the United States, we've got Thanksgiving, and there might be sort of a slowdown as you move towards Thanksgiving. So that could be the joyous. Sounds good. Unfortunately, with the joyous, we have got two moving lines. We've got the third line moves and the sixth line moves. And this means that on the surface, things might look very pleasant in terms of relationships. People seem to be accommodating. They seem to be warm and they're friendly, but it could be a trap. And I think it's possibly a good idea not to get too close to anyone, or at least not to get. You need to have a critical mind, and you don't want to lose sight of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, and other people could just be a serious distraction. And you might realize that what people have to offer to begin with is just not worth the effort. People are just not serious, whoever they are. Might be your spouse, your partner. It could be someone you've just met. There is a sense in which you're wondering, what is the basis for all of this, and why are people being so complacent? And so your interactions with other people may end up being actually completely unsatisfactory. And what you should certainly not do is be influenced. So if someone tells you to do something or suggests that something is a good idea, don't necessarily believe them, particularly if their suggestion relates to sort of leisure, or let's do this, it might be fun. Let's go to a restaurant, let's go to a theatre or a party or whatever. This kind of suggestion should be treated with caution and indeed perhaps suspicion, because things could get out of control quite quickly, and at many levels, just inappropriate displays of emotion, perhaps being in a situation where you're overcommitting or you're revealing things you don't want to reveal. So I do think that the joyous is not necessarily very fortunate. And, we've got those two moving lines, a third line, a sixth line, are just about losing fundamentally who you are. So you have an idea about what you want to do, what you want to enjoy, what kind of person you are, what kind of activities you choose. But then when you start getting involved with other people, you lose touch with that, and you find yourself not enjoying yourself, but you're kind of being part of other people's idea of enjoyment, and that's not where you want to be. And so I think it's just very important that you hold firm, and if in doubt, say no. And these two moving lines, they do take us to a different hexagram. And because the third line is broken, sixth line is broken, they move to unbroken lines. So the whole thing moves to hexagram number 1, which is a creative, very different energy here. And it may be when we think about the lunar cycle, we're now in a waning moon. We've got a new moon on right at the end of a week, and perhaps that's what we should be thinking about. But actually, many of our relationships, and in terms of at least the particular phase in which these relationships are in, are reaching the end. There's nothing we can do. I mean, it may be part of the reason why one might get caught up in mindless enjoyment, is that there are forces trying to keep something together which is actually finished. And so enjoyment is just a sign, things must be fine because people are having fun, but they're not really having fun at all, or at least the fun is very empty. But you move into the creative, and this is perhaps a time when you can start to rethink relationships, and when you can bring something new onto the table. And it may be the creative, if for example you're looking for a new relationship, then the creative is going to be very good, but not this week. The end of a week, you have a new idea about what you want, and you can actually start something. But don't be too close-minded about what it is that you're starting. You have to be open to anything, because it is a creative, it is a new spark, it is a new beginning. And of course, when I'm talking about relationships, I'm talking about anything. It's not just romance. And the creative can also represent a new phase in an existing relationship. But again, that happens right at the end of a week, and sort of don't have ideas about where the creative is taking you. It doesn't take kindly to being to having ideas put on it. But creative is a new spark, and it perhaps is like a dragon, and the dragon doesn't want to be told what to do. But in terms of relationships, let the dragon will eventually show itself, but not until the end of the week. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed and you enjoyed the video, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks very much for watching, and I will talk to you again very soon.